Hi, I'm Dr. Chad Larson. There's a lot of interest both clinically and with researchers to evaluate the connection between the brain and the body. And there's lots of different interesting connections that have been made that at the research level that we could apply to the clinical level. And so there's an interesting study that definitely piqued my interest. Recently it was published in a journal called Brain, Behavior, and Immunity. And what they did is they evaluated a particular type of cognitive function called fluid intelligence. And fluid intelligence is basically described as general reasoning, general pattern recognition, and the ability to solve a novel problem without task-specific experience about that problem. And so this is called general sort of fluid intelligence. And this type of fluid intelligence we know generally declines with aging. But the degree to which and the extent to which fluid intelligence declines varies quite a bit in populations, or let's just say from individual to individual. So they studied individuals in their 40s and 50s, and they evaluated this fluid intelligence. And there's kind of a fluid intelligence kind of test that they take. And then they measured that against a certain body evaluation that I was very interested in because of my interest in fat and fat burning and metabolic syndrome, which we've talked a lot about in past episodes. They evaluated via a DEXA body scan basically fat and muscle mass, and then they made the correlation with fluid intelligence. So it's a very interesting study to make this correlation, and they came up with some very specific correlations that were significant. And here's basically what they found, is that those with a greater degree of lean muscle mass, as again evaluated in the sophisticated way of a DEXA scan, which is the most sensitive and specific way of evaluating these this type of body composition and these body measurements. The greater degree of lean muscle mass that the people had, the greater maintenance of this type of cognitive ability called fluid intelligence that the people maintained. And this was true for both men and women. So the more lean muscle mass, the greater the retention of this type of learning called fluid intelligence. And conversely, they noticed that the greater amount of visceral adipose tissue or visceral adipose mass, in other words, belly fat, the greater degree of belly fat, the greater the degree of decline of this type of fluid intelligence. And so the researchers went a little bit into why they think this is going on. Like, what's the connection between increased amount of visceral adipose tissue and loss of this very important part of our cognitive intelligence, this fluid intelligence connection. And what they discussed was interesting. They talked about as there is an accumulation of fat accumulation in the abdomen, which is different than subcutaneous fat, because they looked at this as well. Subcutaneous fat is maybe the little bit of fat that might, hang over your pants, particularly if they're tight or something like that. But it's the deeper visceral adipose tissue, different than subcutaneous fat. It's the deeper fat that surrounds our organs, like our liver, and can really accumulate because of different metabolic issues. As this visceral adipose tissue accumulates, it's a big source of inflammation. And so as we get more inflammatory chemicals that are being produced by this visceral adipose fat, that also affects the immune system, like the white blood cells. So they measured all this in this study, and they found that with the greater amount of fat, there's going to be a greater degree of inflammatory imbalance and also immune system imbalance. And that's what they think has led to the decrease in this kind of cognitive ability, because of the direct effects of the immune system and the inflammatory system on the general function and structure of the brain. And so it's very interesting kind of body-brain connection. So It just speaks to the importance of maintaining lean muscle mass, particularly as we get older. And it's just one of those habits that we want to start as young as possible and maintain for as long as we can. And along with maintaining lean muscle mass is going to be the flip side of burning more and maintaining a lesser degree of this really destructive visceral adipose tissue, now that we know it even affects the function of the brain. We've talked a lot in the past about metabolic syndrome and how that affects multiple systems like your cardiovascular system, but now having even a better understanding of how this could affect the brain is something that we're all keenly, I think, interested in preserving, obviously, brain function. And this type of fluid intelligence was an interesting study to make these connections. So hope that helps to, hope you sort of learned something about that. I'll keep reading the studies and bringing you the information. Until then, keep it real.